You're listening to Simon Scriver's amazing Ultimate Fundraising Superstar podcast, talking all things fundraising, charities, nonprofits, and more. Here's your host, as always, Simon Scriver.
Welcome to the second ever live fundraising podcast. You're all very welcome. All of you who are either listening live, who are just kind of eavesdropping and dropping in to see what's actually happening, what this is about, and get a taste of other people's unpopular opinions so we can mock and laugh at them. No, not at all, but just so we can widen our minds, open our minds, and have a bit of discussion on some things in the sector that people certainly disagree with. So perhaps you're listening to this live, or otherwise you might be listening to the recording of this. This will be published on Simon Scriver's Amazingly Ultimate Fundraising Superstar podcast. This will go out as one of our episodes, so you can listen back at your convenience. But if you want to take part in this beyond just listening to it, then you are very, very welcome to do so. I keep saying, think of this as a call-in radio show, call-in talk show, which is not very good and almost certainly not going to work. That's kind of the MO of this live podcast. But if you want to take part, then there is a Google Hangouts link that you'll see in the YouTube comments. You're going to see it in the on Twitter as well. So if you want to take part, click on that. It'll bring you into Google Hangouts where you'll see my face. You can mute yourself. You can get rid of your video if you don't want people to see you eating or doing whatever it is you're doing. And then if you want to chime in on any opinions, I'll give you an opportunity to do so. And you can just unmute yourself and I'll get you on it. Just to flag that the video will be recording. So if there's anything you don't want people to see, then turn off your video. But you'll probably get a warning from YouTube in that respect anyway. So just while we're waiting for people to get onto this and find it so that people don't miss it, just to let you know what's coming up. If you're interested, I'm flying out tonight to Oslo in Norway. I'll be speaking in Oslo, running a fundraising workshop if anyone is in the neighborhood to come to that. I'll be speaking with the amazing Jen Love at the Italian fundraising conference next week. And then I have a number of workshops lined up at other conferences. Of particular interest to some of you might be the Pay What You Like workshops that I'm doing with Nikki Bell. These are especially good for any nonprofits, any fundraisers who don't have a budget or have a shitty boss who's not going to send them on these kind of workshops. You can just pay like £5, €5, whatever it is. So we have one coming up in Edinburgh in a couple of weeks. And then there'll be more lined up and more coming up. If you want one in your area, then please get in touch with me. So thank you again to anyone who's just tuning in now. This is the live fundraising podcast. And following on from last month, I'm trying to do these once a month. Obviously, the regular podcast comes out once a week. The quick tip comes out once a week. And then once a month, what I'm trying to do is these live podcasts where people have an opportunity to break the seal of their podcast experience. If you've never been on a podcast, this is a great opportunity to just get on and be heard by 2 or 3 people, or possibly millions of people. So you can be heard by all sorts of people. You can offer your opinion, or it's just a break to your monotonous day if you want to listen to what other people are saying about it. This is the live fundraising podcast. And what we're talking about today, this is kind of a part 2 from last time. We are talking about unpopular opinions in fundraising. So a while ago, a couple of months ago, I posted a tweet over at Toast Fundraiser, and I said, what's your unpopular opinion in fundraising? And it was a lot of replies, a lot of people with popular opinions who are trying to pretend they were unpopular, just so that, I don't know, they're just attention seeking. But then lots of unpopular opinions, lots of divisive opinions, and a lot of people coming in with things which, really made me think and I found really interesting. So today on the podcast, I've picked 3 of those that I think are open for discussion. I've got some nice guests lined up. Obviously, always anyone is welcome to join in this. But I want to hear some opinions. And actually, the first one I want to talk about, if I may, is one that Nikki Bell posted, Charity Nikki, who I've just mentioned, who I'm running some workshops with. She talks about job titles, and I know this is a bit of a bugbear for her in terms of that the job titles we use within fundraising are for the benefit of internal processes and are a hindrance for external dealings and creativity for acting beyond your role. And really, that's just a very intelligent way of saying, you know, I'm going to try and say the dumbed down version, which is essentially that we, in fundraising, we give ourselves job titles, or we're given job titles. And there's a question there about whether these job titles have an impact on our ability to fundraise. And there is research out there which shows different job titles make donors more receptive to us or less receptive to us. But that these job titles, these fundraising job titles, can box us in. And actually, one of the people that I can see lined up to speak is Jen Love. And Jen Love is, I just mentioned her, we're presenting a couple of workshops together. You may have seen them speak together. But it's fortuitous that she's on here because actually we had this conversation before about job titles. And you were talking about, Jen was talking about her father, who is David Love, the godfather of fundraising. And he has some strong opinions on fundraising. And we were talking about this idea of actually, you know, not having any job titles. I mean, I know on my business card, when I got my business cards done a couple of years ago, very, very expensive business cards, that I was thinking about, you know, what is my job title here? And the conclusion was that, you know, really a job title is just going to box me in. And so it was that idea of getting rid of that job title. So let me just see if Jennifer Love is here. Jen, are you with me?
I am.
Oh, hello, Jen.
Hello, Simon.
You're coming through my main audio for some reason. But how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Yeah, are you?
Great to be back on the podcast. Thank you for doing this again.
Yeah, thanks for taking part. That's very exciting. What was I going to say? You're all set for Italy next week?
I'm all set for Italy next week. Can't wait. Spending a week in Italy in springtime is a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, really. It's going to be warm. And you and I are presenting on the usual Donor Love jazz and a few other interesting things, which is going to be a lot of fun. It's your first time presenting with a translator?
It is my first time presenting with a translator, as it is yours.
Yeah, which is going to be a nightmare.
Completely.
Possibly. So I'm curious. Thanks for coming in, Jen. And I'm curious what if you have any opinions on this job title thing, and I believe you do because we've kind of talked about this before.
I do, yeah, and as does my dad, and I think that's where you started this conversation with the chat that we'd had a while back, because I think my dad, especially in the last year when he was working very closely and directly with legacy donors, he found that his title of, you know, planned giving specialist or something, like, he was always aware that it was a total turnoff. Like, nobody wants to talk to a planned giving specialist. What does that sound like? You know, it sounds like it's work. It sounds like it's an advisor. It sounds like something official.
Oh yeah, we've got
and he wanted to be called a donor caretaker, like a caretaker for legacy donors, and it was like a conversation with HR and a whole other thing, which I think is ludicrous, because it does make sense to me that a donor would want to talk to someone whose title is something like donor caretaker, legacy donor caretaker, as opposed to a senior planned giving advisor. And I know there is research to back that up too. I think Claire Routley has done some research on this in the UK about job titles.
Yeah, can you still hear me?
I can, but there seems to be some kind of delay. Am I on the wrong channel or something?
No, I'm sure it's my fault this time, although it was your fault last time. No, these things always have a bit of a sketchy delay. So yeah, I mean, I do remember that report. But in terms of your dad, was he doing that? He wasn't doing that based on research, really. He was doing it based on his own feeling. Because I don't think there's any research on caretaker.
I think it was a combination of his own instincts, and then it made him say, well, I wonder if this is a thing. Like, I wonder if anyone's actually done any research to look into this, because it makes sense to me that my title is a turnoff, or my title is not not doing me any favors for donors. I think that's how he came across it. But yeah, and I mean, John and I have always believed that the titles that we have at our business doesn't matter very much, like you, on our business cards. You know, someone's not going to call me because of my title. They're going to call me because they met me and we had an interesting exchange. And I appreciate they're necessary for some charities and necessary within some organizations, but I do think I agree with Nikki for the most part.
What is your job title? Do you have one?
John and I are partners. We're both partners.
But you're not partners.
No, we're not partners. We've been over this. No, but I think
and
it
is
is.
partner, I mean, is partner an attractive job title to, I mean, obviously you're not kind of donor facing as such, you're more kind of non-profit facing. Is that something
Well,
that you think makes you look more important?
I think that's a good point because I don't think of it as a title. Like
Mm,
I think of it as I think of a title in the within the context of a job description or a job role as something that is within a pay band that you earn, that you apply for, that you are somehow qualified for based on a set of you need to have this and this and this and this and this in order to meet this job title. Whereas I think something like partner or principal or lead strategist or something like that, I think those are a little more open.
yeah.
Like I don't think that's the same thing. I think anybody would look at a title of partner and understand what that means. Same as principal. Whereas, senior development officer / communications, I would have no idea what that means. I have no context for that outside of development offices. So if I
Yeah.
was a donor, I would be like, okay. And I think the example that you give sometimes is when you go to a staff listing on a website for a lot of charities and you'll see, principal gifts fundraiser, major gifts fundraiser, VP advancement, VP development. And a donor's got to look at that and think, which one of these people can answer my question about fundraising? And, we're expecting a lot of donors to be able to navigate that.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the examples I was talking about is major donors. Who, if you've got a major donor officer or a person who has major donors in their job title, who is the donor who's reaching out to a major donor? What kind of person identifies themselves as a major donor? And that, it doesn't necessarily say anything about your wealth, but it maybe says a bit more about your personality.
Or lack thereof.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, someone, I think it might have been Nikki or someone following up was talking about this idea of almost having like two job titles, which is, the job title for HR and the job title for internal, and to go on about those pay bands that you were talking about. And then the job title that is maybe public facing. And I know you and John often show, and I've used it a couple times from you guys, is the example of the Alzheimer's Society. Is it the Alzheimer's Society in Toronto? Kathy Barrick. And she has her job title, her internal job title is CEO or something, boring along those lines. But I think the job title she puts on like her thank you letters is Chief Thank You Officer.
Thank you, officer. Yeah, exactly. And that's delighter, right? As a donor, you get that and that warms you up as opposed to CEO.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder. I mean, yeah, I suppose it does. Like, it's nice. It's nice to be thanked. I mean, I like the way she puts the two things on, so you still feel like the CEO is getting in touch with it, which is important, but it just gets a bit of her person, like her lovable personality coming across.
I also do think that, if we expand out the conversation around job titles, I also think that I find a lot of times that when we do kind of stories or updates, I'm thinking especially for environmental charities, where we have updates from field staff, program staff. In some cases, that job title does really matter because that you're hearing from the, wetlands program officer for Ontario Nature, and you think, oh, I understand what that is. That would be some kind of a biologist or an ecologist, and this person's got an interesting update for me about their work within the charity. So I think there is a place for job titles in some of the work that we do and some of the things that we talk about. But within fundraising, I do think that they're mostly internally serving or kind of job hire HR serving.
They're
and
almost
having
like
two titles.
Almost like these crowdsourced job titles where it's like, okay, well, they're in the development department, so we have to have the word development in them. They're an officer, we can't call them a manager, and then it's just like sticking all these little bits together, which you end up with this ridiculous job title.
With the Frankenstein. Well, then the other thing too is that I also think that people then, fundraising nonprofit professionals are looking for the title so that they can make a career advancement as opposed to looking for the right role. Like, oh, I was a manager in my last job, so I don't want to become a senior officer because then I'm one step away from development or VP. And I understand that career laddering, needing to apply, have a resume or a CV that looks like your job titles are improving. But, to not apply for a job because the title is slightly different and might not, is not good for your career, I think is also kind of not a problem, but it's also a factor in when we consider job titles, that they're also not consistent. Even within Canada, they're not consistent, let alone internationally. So if you're a manager somewhere, that's different than being a director somewhere else,
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a few comments coming in here, which I might just read. So Jean O'Brien from the Digital Charity Lab, sorry, she rebranded, from Digital Charity Lab. She says, I'd imagine many non-profit job titles are completely incomprehensible to people outside the sector, no? And frequently incomprehensible inside the sector too, of course. Yeah, I mean, I think it's like it's jargon. A lot of our job titles are jargon, and it's even things like development officer, even fundraising. I used the example before about Harrison's mom, who didn't like the word donor. She didn't like to be referred to as a donor because she saw donor as a blood donor or an organ donor.
Organs, yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to giving cash. And it was just like, because we're inside the sector, it can be very hard for us to look outside and consider it like that. I have a comment from Gina at Paws Rescue Island, who's pulled me up on my shitty bus, can't afford the training. She says maybe their shitty bus can't afford the training that I mentioned at the beginning. Yeah, that's fair enough. But Gina, I wasn't talking about people like you. I was talking about your bosses who are potentially shitty. So I have a comment here as well from Stansbury Consulting over on Twitter. And she says the worst title she saw recently was Capital Campaign Marketer. Capital Campaign Marketer. Who wants to talk to this person? But she says she loves the idea of a caretaker, which sounds donor focused and caring. I mean, that's interesting. Obviously, there's different language internationally. For me, when I hear caretaker, we don't really use the word caretaker. And actually, when you said it, the first thing that came to mind was undertaker, in terms of like, donors passing away. So there's that consideration there, that language internationally, but even within a country, language can mean different things, and we have to be careful there. Any terrible job titles jump out at you, Jen? Have you heard any weird job titles? Well,
that capital campaign marketer is pretty terrible. One of the worst offenders, I think, is anything that has strategic or strategy in it.
Yeah.
Strategic philanthropic advisor is a pretty lofty one that I've seen before, which I think is ridiculous. I mean, that to me is alphabet soup. I mean, if and there's also the ones that there's a little bit of a newer trend, which I think is actually kind of endearing in some cases, inspiration officer.
Really? You like that?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm not saying I like it. I think it's an interesting twist on job titles. Like, so why are we at two ends of the spectrum? Either it's like undecipherable jargon that means nothing, or it's like, the kind of self-talk that we're doing to ourselves when we're meditating about what we want to be and who we are, Why can't we just have regular in-between titles that say the work that we do so that people can understand and look forward to talking to us? It seems like there's two extremes when it comes to job titles.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard to almost imagine what's going through someone's, a real person, not a fundraiser. They're a real person's mind when they read like inspiration officer. And my gut knee-jerk reaction there was like, it's a bit lame and cheesy. But actually, what we've seen so many times in fundraising is lame and cheesy works really well. And if people are at that emotional state where they're making a donation, maybe they want to hear from an inspiration officer.
And maybe they'll be like, wow, like I'll be talking to someone like Tony Robbins or, Simon Scriver.
Fucking hope not. Oh, God. Are you putting me in the same category as Tony Robbins? No, he's right. Yeah, I'm trying to think who was the in the Misfits organization with AJ Leon. Do you know AJ Leon? And he's got a crazy job title. But he's always, all their job titles are all about disruption and troublemaking. And you see, especially people coming from the tech sector, there's this trend of like troublemaking job titles and ninja titles and like real kind of too cool for school job titles. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's one right answer, but I think it's about all of, whenever anyone's picking a job title, it's not getting too bogged down on it, but actually reflecting on what the purpose of your role is and making sure the job title is picked for I suppose, your target audience as opposed to what the board wants or what your CEO wants.
Well, I think that was part of the problem that my dad was experiencing, was that it came back to like, oh, well, this just like, we're not against this idea, David, but you just, how would we compare you to someone in HR or in communications or in the program side, in the field teams? And he was kind of like, okay, we're not talking the same language because that's not I'm not talking about how you refer to me internally. I'm talking about changing the way that my business card and the way that donors talk to me. And that became like confusing. Oh, we don't know what to do with that was kind of the answer, which is just.
It goes back to like our decision making. You know, if we're making decisions based on what Doris in HR says, you know, how do you explain that to a donor? It's like, oh well, we've had to call it that because we have to compare the pay grade to this person in the project side of it and all this. I mean, the person, a real person, a real donor who's actually listening to that would be like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Well, and that's something that we've talked about before. And I was just talking to Rory, our friend Rory Green, about this not that long ago, pulling up a chair in those kinds of conversations and saying, what would our donor or our potential board volunteers, like what would the stakeholders of our organization think of this conversation that basically says, you can't have an internal job title because we can't match it up. Doris can't match it up in HR. Like, think about how that would sound, as you just said. Pull up a chair, like actually physically have a chair at the table. Like, what would this person say? What would the donor think? Nice. Which I think is interesting.
That kind of empty chair there for people to think.
Exactly.
You know, for us to put ourselves in their shoes. I have a couple other people just lined up here, Jen. I don't know if they have opinions on this job title discussion. I know there's one person who is very passionate about chuggers, which we're going to be talking about in a second. But if anyone wants to chime in on the job titles before I move on and look at another title, then please feel free to unmute yourself and shout in. Otherwise, I want to consider the next unpopular opinion and maybe get a few other people's thoughts on that, which is an extremely hot topic, if not one of the hottest topics in fundraising and nonprofit sectors, and it always gets people riled up and angry. Well, no, not always. We're kind of finding a bit of a balance with it, but it's this idea of chuggers. And I don't know if you know what a chugger is. A chugger is the people who stand on the street, or perhaps the people who knock on your door and engage with you face to face to sign you up to a monthly donation. The word chugger is a derogatory term. It comes from charity mugger. And I think it was kind of brought in by the media, by the newspapers, as a way to kind of deride this mode of fundraising, which people find quite offensive sometimes. Some people find that. Me personally, I don't mind use of the word chugger. I am an ex-chugger. I used to run a chugger agency, and I have a lot of love for chuggers. I don't mind the word chugger just because I think it's a very easy way to kind of describe what you're talking about when you're talking to people in fundraising. And I think it's kind of like we're taking back that word. But one of the unpopular opinions that we had on this thread was that chuggers damage a charity's brand. And we had a gentleman who made that tweet. A few people actually made variations on that comment. A bunch of people agreed with it. I know, obviously, I've worked with a lot of people who would disagree with that, or perhaps say that chuggers justify that, you know, they're a means to an end, and the damage they cause is justified by the amount they raise. But one of the people I'd love to get their opinion on this is Alana Carson-Woodley, who she might be here, or she might be easily distracted by something shiny that's going on. Alana is she runs an agency, a face-to-face agency in Canada, an agency that works all over North America. Who's behind me? Oh, sorry, Harrison's just eating crisps very loudly. And so I wouldn't mind getting Alana's knee-jerk reaction on this, because obviously her bread and butter is face-to-face fundraisers, door-to-door fundraisers. And she, I imagine she works with a number of people who would take offense at this idea that chuggers are damaging. Alana, are you with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you perfectly. Very clear. How are you today, Alana?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. And you're, I don't know if you wanted, sometimes agencies are funny about saying the name of their agency. Do you want to say what agency you run?
Sure. I run Public Outreach Canada. We are also in the US and Australia.
Mm-hmm. You're in Australia. I always forget that. And Public Outreach, essentially what happens is big name charities, usually big name charities, but any nonprofit can hire you to recruit monthly donors. So you're recruiting door-to-door donors, door-to-door, sometimes on street, sometimes at events. You're bringing in monthly donors for a fee.
Correct.
Okay. So now you obviously have to be saying that chuggers don't damage a charity's brand. You obviously believe that, or is there somewhere in you where you understand that chuggers can be problematic?
Well, so I'm single and I go on a fair amount of first dates. And I really like watching people's face when I explain what my company does. Because so often I'll get like, can you not knock on my door during dinner? Or, oh, really? Like, that's what you do? And so I understand the reaction. The market's a little bit different here in Canada and the US in comparison to what we've seen in the UK and Europe. We are not in a situation where there is permitting. It's not in the press heavily or anything like that. But I think that, we will recruit about 75,000 monthly donors this year. And we're reaching an audience that couldn't be reached otherwise in a lot of cases.
And I mean, I know from having run an agency before and having worked as a chugger, like the gift level is quite high. Generally, the gift level of monthly donors is quite high through face-to-face compared to like direct mail, compared to other mediums.
Yeah, we're recruiting donors. Canada is highly regionalized. So looking at English-speaking Canada, it's probably going to be about $19 or $20 a month. That we're recruiting people at, and most of them have no prior giving history with the organization that they've signed up to.
But so the complaint that generally people bring to the table when they're talking about chuggers are two things, I think, or from what I've heard in my experience. One is the attrition. So face-to-face donors are more likely to cancel than donors recruited through other means. And also what people say a problem with face-to-face donors is too aggressive. Yeah. So to come to my door, to have the nerve to stop me on my street, to get up in my face and force me, Alana, to sign up as a monthly donor. That's, what does that mean?
Well, I think if they've been forced to sign up as a monthly donor, they probably should talk about their inability to say no with their therapist. Yeah. Because there are so many checks and balances within the system now around making sure that people understand it's a long-term commitment. We're doing a welcome call, things like that. And to be frank, we've watched the experience in the UK and have been extremely protective of the marketplace here. We get about one complaint to every 500 donors that we're recruiting. We have a turf management system to make sure that you're not sort of running a gauntlet, so that you're not running into people every 2 blocks or so. Yeah. But, it's so easy to just say, I give elsewhere. I'm already giving, I give online, have a great day.
I mean, that's one of the things I never understood is the people who kind of felt they could say no. And maybe that's unfair of me because I've worked in it and because I've worked in sales. Like, people still stop me on the street and try and sign me up. And for me, it's quite an easy thing to like just say no. And I always remember, in the agency, people used to say that individuals would, just think of ways to walk by chuggers. So pretending to talk on their phone. And I'm like, well, why don't you just walk by? Like, I don't understand what the problem is. There's a comment that's come in here, which I think is a fair comment from Kelly Anderson. She says 1 complaint per 500 donors you've mentioned. And I think in my agency days, it was 1 per 200 or something like that, or 1 per about 200. But how many complaints per person contacted? So yeah, I mean, obviously you have the same people who can't say no. Very often there's this whole other group of people who can't complain. So, what the original unpopular opinion we're talking about is the damage to the brand. So how many people are getting, knocked on the door or stopping there, and they're coming away and they're saying, I'm never going to donate to that charity again, or I'm never going to donate to any charity again. Because of this aggressive tactic, because this chugger has been rude to me or annoyed me. Do we have any sense of like how big the damages, like the untold damages? Is there any way to measure that?
Well, social media is a great indicator. of whether or not it's going well. And, we do more door to door than we do street these days. But a couple of years ago, we had a program going that had, a fun name to it, and people turned it into a hashtag, and they would tag the charity, and it got a little sassy, and we had to take that feedback. People will say anything anonymously. They love to tweet about a canvasser or about a charity interaction that they've just had, and I think that that's anonymized the feedback rather than people who are willing to actually write in or call in or something like that as well. I think that if you look at it, a door canvasser will they'll knock on 100 doors in a night. They will speak with 10 people and they'll sign up one donor. So if we get more than, a complaint every 6 months for an individual canvasser, we have a problem. There's something happening there. And that's on the agency to take quick action. The worst thing that can happen to me is that we get a spatter of complaints and we have to pull out of the market because, it's all about building a sustainable program with these charities. That's something that can be leveraged and done on scale, and you have to protect the market.
Well, this is the other thing, you kind of touched on it there, and then maybe I'll move on to someone else and give you a break. But in terms of the longevity of it, in terms of the damage to the brand, you've been working with clients, some of the same clients for years. I know in Ireland and other markets I've worked in that people, nonprofits who are doing this have been doing it for years. And there's the feeling that, surely by now they'd notice if the complaints were so out of proportion compared to the money it was bringing in. Well, surely they'd notice if the brand had been damaged. I don't know of any nonprofit who's using street fundraising, door-to-door fundraising, where it has been detrimental. There's very few who have stopped doing it, and very often they've stopped doing it because of a personal dislike of a head of fundraising. I haven't seen any numbers where it's like, okay, the damage this has caused to our income in the last 5 years or the last 10 years is more than we've raised. Usually it outweighs it.
Absolutely. So we have been in Canada since 2002. I started here in 2003. And the first clients that I worked with are still some of our biggest partnerships that we're looking at. So, some organizations that have 50, 60,000 monthly donors in Canada, we are responsible for a large proportion of those. And we protect their brand through come out on turf with us, come and do some like a door shift, a mall shift, a street shift, and see what people are saying. You can't just hand over a budget and not prepare your organization. The people answering the phone need to know how to identify a canvasser, need to know the difference between an inquiry and a complaint. And the team that is purchasing the service needs to bring a high level of partnership, including coming on turf, briefings with the staff, education for the canvassers. And if you are not being encouraged to have a high level of contact with your vendor, it's a big red flag, a huge red flag.
All right. I'm conscious that, you obviously run an agency and I'm an ex-chugger, so, we're probably a little bit biased. And what I found in the sector is anyone who's done it before is generally in favor of it. I'm curious if there's anyone out there who wants to kind of speak negatively, but there's a comment here, which, let me try and play God's advocate here and look at the other side. Kelly, again, is saying with regards to social media, in her village, they have a community Facebook page. When chuggers start knocking in the village, an alert goes on the page to let people know. Warn is the language used. Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. I remember on social media seeing chugger accounts where they were saying, this is where the street fundraiser is. So and people, not opening their door because they don't want to get into a conversation. So something's clearly going wrong here. If we're in a situation where people are warning each other about a means of fundraising, we can say that the result justifies these complaints and things like that. But at the same time, you know, as an ethical industry, I don't think there's any of us who want to upset people or be warned about people. Obviously, we get this in other forms of fundraising as well. But it just seems that that face-to-face seems to be the hot topic. I'm conscious there's another public outreach person on the call, my friend Frederick. So if Frederick wants to chime in and offer his opinion, I'm always happy to hear his wonderful accent. But if anyone else wants to have an opinion, I mean, I'm conscious with regards to complaints, in terms of recorded complaints, face-to-face does come in lower than some others, but it's clearly one of the most volatile forms of fundraising. It's the one that makes the front of the newspaper. Corporate fundraising complaints don't make the front of the newspaper. And so there's clearly something going on here. And I wonder what, if anything, we can do about that. I wonder what the future of it is, or do we just accept it, that this is the nature of it, that there's going to be people who hate it, there's going to be Facebook groups that warn about it. And as fundraisers, our goal is to raise as much money as possible. As nonprofits, our goal is to help as many people as possible. So it comes back to the original unpopular opinion. Does the good that comes out of it outweigh the bad? And Alana, I'm guessing that you would say, yes, it does. The good outweighs it.
I think so. And like, I want to acknowledge that the Canadian marketplace is likely very, very different from other places. We have watched the articles and the comics and the headlines that have happened in the UK and Australia, and been, you know, we don't have a PFRA because it hasn't been required. We haven't had that level of animosity or conflict on the street. I think, you know, while it gets big opinions because people who don't like it are going to be very vocal, you've probably got the same number of people who are sick of the direct mail that you're receiving or hate phone calls as well. So, I mean, I have a tremendous personal bias because I love what I do. We've got about 50 people now who are working in nonprofits who started at public outreach. Harrison is very, very cute right now. But the if it's done right, face-to-face should not be generating the level of complaints that people are talking about.
And I think that's important. You know, again, this isn't something that you can say because it'll be seen as bias, but I think there is a scale of chugger agencies and things like that. And I know there's agencies who pay commission only, and there's slightly more high pressure, perhaps. And there's agencies that work some form of sales and some form of fundraising, whereas your agency, I know, is hourly wage. And that you have a, you know, you only do nonprofits. And for me, I feel like there's a scale there that some are a bit more, you know, that we can't talk about them all in the same breath because they operate very differently. So I think it's, you know, I just want to flag that I'm aware that your agency runs slightly different. I don't want this to sound like an advertisement unless you actually want to sponsor this podcast. But yeah, Jen, love.
Yeah, I was actually going to just jump in and say something that Alana just touched on a little bit, which is we've had this, is this damaging to our brand in all other forms of channel-based fundraising? We definitely have had it in direct mail, even in, and I know it's, again, completely different market in Canada, but we haven't had, we have had situations where people will say, yeah, there's no way I will give to this charity ever again because they sent me this giant pack of labels, mailing labels. So there's definitely been, and the same thing with telemarketing. I mean, most board members, I think a lot of us can agree that most board members say, oh, I don't want to look into telemarketing because I don't like it myself. So I think the face-to-face is a little more in your face. So I think it gets right now it's getting a disproportionate amount of complaints, but I think the same thing has been said about direct mail, telemarketing, very expensive galas, like no corporate fundraising doesn't make the front page of the newspaper, but there is often stuff in the media here in Canada and elsewhere about ludicrously expensive events and, you know, whether this gala is actually doing the service for this organization and is this the right way to be spending so much money? So I think it comes back to, and this is a bit simplistic, but it's not fundraising that bugs people. It's not face-to-face fundraising that bugs people. It's not telemarketing that bugs people. It's crappy fundraising that bugs people. And if people feel like this isn't for me and you're not talking to me, then they can take a lot of offense. Like a millennial getting a package of mailing labels, or like an older person feeling as though they need to warn their neighbors about the chugger. Like, I think it comes from the same place of, this isn't for me and I'm not interested, so therefore this is a kind of offensive or over the line when it does. I mean, Alana said 75,000 new monthly donors for causes that I think we can all agree this planet needs. Amnesty International, environmental organizations, social, like, I'm glad that there's 75,000 new monthly donors coming on board. So
I mean,
that's what I would think.
The interesting thing about chugger complaints, or complaints about this medium, I think is there's organizations that get more. I mean, there's forms of fundraising that get more complaints per approach. So I seem to remember from the UK, one of the UK reports, corporate fundraising gets more complaints by what's the word, per person, gets more complaints than street fundraising. And I think there was another one like telephone fundraising is up there. Even like voluntary fundraising where people are shaking buckets, it gets a high level of complaints. The unique thing and the interesting thing about chuggers is the internal dispute within our sector. I feel like if there's a complaint about direct mail, if there's a complaint about TV campaigns, the sector as a whole rises to defend it, and
right.
we don't kind of cannibalize ourselves. But there's people within the sector, probably half of the sector, who are adamant and very strongly opinionated that we should not be doing face-to-face. And therein lies a whole other problem where we're just fighting amongst ourselves. How can we create this united front when half the people don't defend that, but they would defend direct mail? They would at least understand the other forms of fundraising are a crucial part of our fundraising programs. Jen, any thoughts?
I completely agree with you. And I think it's because it's easiest to complain about, and really a lot of us who are saying, and this is going to be another unpopular opinion, a lot of people who are saying something like chuggers damage a charity's brand or I hate face-to-face fundraising are probably the type of people who would never respond to that kind of interaction or channel anyway. So it's weighted differently because face-to-face is reaching a whole new audience of people who know exactly how to complain about what they're not liking and feel like they have a voice to say, I'm not liking this.
Yeah. I feel like there's a whole podcast around this topic. I mean, I think there's several podcasts, so we might come back to that. And maybe Alana will join us for one of those if she's not too busy doing whatever it is she does. But I just want to move on to the final unpopular opinion that I want to talk about today. Was a comment or a tweet from Adrian Salmon, who has swam upstream in the opinions of fundraising. And he said, all donors are not equal. Despite how democratic we might like to be, a mass fundraising program that isn't actively identifying outliers is only doing half its job. And I think this is an interesting one. It's obviously on the smart tier of opinions because Adrian is a very intelligent person, way more intelligent than me. But is essentially saying, or how I interpret that is the feeling that some people talk and talk about donors, that all donors are equal and we should put them all center and they're all number one. There's an ongoing joke I have with Rory Green and Stephen Shattuck about this concept. You hear people saying treat all donors like major donors, which is fucking impossible. You can't treat. Oh yeah, sorry, I just saw it in front of me. Did I? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Just ignore that. The major donor, you can't treat all your donors like major donors because we don't have the resources to do that. And what I think Adrian is advocating, and actually, I've heard a lot of people talk about this, is that actually we have to tier our donors, that our top 10% or our top 20% of donors get treated in one way. Basically we're talking about this Pareto principle where 20% of our donors are going to give 80% of our income, and so we have to treat them accordingly. And I'm curious, we'll go back to Alana and Jen. If anyone else wants to join in, please kind of pop in or put your comments down in the box or tweet at me and I'll read them. But Jen, I'm curious from a direct mail point of view. Direct mail is your specialty. That's what, the main area that your organization works on. How do you approach this hierarchy of donors? What's your recommendation when you're dealing with clients? Where do you push them towards?
Well, so I mean, of course, as the as someone who is a very strong advocate of donor love, I disagree with Adrian that all donors are not created equal. I think every gift is a major gift to that donor. So if someone is giving what they can at the end of the month based on their family budget to the food bank, and it's $50 or $25, but it's everything that person can give, that's a major gift to them. So now that's the philosophical Pollyanna hippie part of my brain. I'm smart enough to know that that's not actually achievable by most organizations to be able to treat their $25 or $50 donors the same way as they treat their $10,000 donors. So the only thing I would say to that is, if you're going to spend your time valuing and calculating and reviewing the donors that you treat the best, have that pie, have some part of it where it's not just about money. So if you're ranking all your donors hierarchically based on how much money they give, that's important and is lucrative and will probably raise you the most money. But also consider having a smaller part of that recognition or treatment or donor care program acknowledge number of years of giving, number of different ways that somebody gives, so that it's not just the highest tier donors in terms of value, it's the highest tier donors that you measure in a couple of different ways. And so that if what you're going to do is have a special stewardship stream or a special communications plan for people who give you the most money, do a slightly different version of that same stream for people who've been giving to you for 25 years or more, even if it's a small gift type idea. I think the other thing about that is that you can still send stewardship touches to all your donors, even if they're not your most important donors. You might have to change the format, you might have to do it fewer times a year, you might have to do it differently, but all people who are giving to your organization deserve a certain amount of personalized, or at least feeling personalized, donor care and stewardship. And however you figure that out is about money and resources. But it's still an important question.
I have a few questions off the back of that. I mean, one of the things, are you talking going beyond, first of all, I thought you were talking about kind of lifetime value, that rather than, the person who gives you the most of this time, you're talking very wisely about thinking more about lifetime value. So if someone is giving to you more frequently, if someone is more recently, if someone is a higher value over the long term, then you're going to treat them differently and carve them up. But actually, it sounds like you're going even beyond monetary value, and you're actually talking well, there's a phrase here in the comments which is talking about hierarchy by emotion. Kelly Anderson is saying, rather than this concept of ranking them by value, hierarchy by commitment, which can also be emotional and not value. Is that along the lines of what you're saying, as well as you go beyond the value, or there's a place for monetary value, but there's other things?
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying. And there's a place we talk about measuring dollars and also measuring donors. So if you're going to create a stewardship program where you realize I can't reach everybody, and I know I can't reach everybody, but I'm going to make sure that I reach the people the donors who are giving me the most money, but I'm also carving aside some of the stewardship budget to give special recognition to the people who score high on the donor engagement, even if they're not scoring high on the financial engagement. So for example, a lot of organizations that I've worked with, a number of different organizations, smaller organizations that have very active volunteers and board members who are not Rockefellers. So they give what they can, which is often a smaller sized monthly or annual gift, but they're a board member or a very high level volunteer. Would you want them receiving a direct mail pack or an email or a report that didn't at least say, hey, I know you're also a board member and you're terrific, but here's what we're up to in the rest of the program, and I want to make sure you're seeing everything that we're doing. Like you have to ask yourself, do you have a cohort of donors for whom it would be inappropriate to treat them like they're just any donor? And if the answer to that is yes, then find ways to make sure that whatever stewardship you're doing acknowledges them as a major donor, even if it doesn't meet your financial criteria for major donor.
So not just not because even beyond monetary, again, I started thinking you were talking there. I thought I knew what you were going to be saying was about value. Yeah, this is Jen's ability is whatever. Whenever I think I know what she's talking about, I don't. Which goes beyond value. So you're talking about board members who, they bring value to the table, which isn't necessarily financial. Your volunteers bring value to it. But, there's obviously some people in our mix. And one of the great things about the nonprofit sector is we look beyond value. If we talk about the service users and the beneficiaries that our organization works with, it doesn't make financial sense to help them. This is one of the reasons I hate the phrase, run charities like a business, because it doesn't make business sense to be nice. It doesn't make business sense to help the world's most vulnerable people. But obviously, if you had a vulnerable person or a service user who made a donation, you'd probably be treating them like a major donor, even if it was a small amount, because they're a crucial part of the organization's work. But they just have that different insight and that special relationship with the organization. So then are we talking about that there's a whole wave of people that, we do treat like a major donor? That what do you think of the phrase that we treat all donors like a major donor? Again, you acknowledge it's not possible, but
isn't that what we would all want? I mean, if we strip aside the needs of our charity, the resources of our team, the time and energy that we have in any given day, the work-life balance that starts to get compromised if fundraisers feel like they need to bring home work in order to sign a bunch of thank you cards by hand because they didn't get to it at work, that's not a reasonable request either. Mm-hmm. But yes, I mean, I would like for all donors to be treated like major donors if they show a different level of engagement with the organization. And putting that into practice is, complicated for some organizations and not for others. But it is the right question to be asking, I think, is how can we make more of our donors feel more important to us, more connected to our cause, more like they're part of this whole story and part of this whole ecosystem in whatever way that looks like. And whether, does it make sense to have expensive recognition? No. Does it make sense to have, plaques or trophies or that kind of permanent type stuff for all your donors? No, of course not. But what are the ways you can show your donors that you value them, even if they're only giving you, a minor gift? Or I think it's Simone Joyeux that always says this, that, we talk about major donors, but we also talk about minor donors. So of course we wouldn't. Every donor wants to feel like they're important to the organization that they support. And how can you make that happen in a way that is resource friendly and has high impact for your donors? And I like to think, and with the organizations that we work with, a lot of this is really cheap. It just takes time. Simple cell phone videos, quick messages that are from the field, updates that come by postcard, or, broadcast voicemails. Those little kinds of things are ways to show people that they're valuable without having to treat them all like they deserve to have their name on the side of the hospital because they gave $10 million,
Yeah, and I mean, maybe that's probably. I'd love to hear what Alana or Frederick or any of the other people who are hovering there think of this. But I suppose maybe my problem is I'm taking it too literally. That when I think about treating people like a major donor, you're thinking about that kind of black tie dinner, and you're thinking about, spending all your time with them. But actually, maybe it's more of a philosophy, or more of an approach that if we can make people feel special and make them feel like they've done something major and significant to them. We can do that through cheap ways. We can do that through stuff that doesn't take a lot of time, and maybe that's more the ethos we're aiming for here. Alana, if you're there, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this phrase. Treating every donor like a major donor. Obviously you're one of the world's leaders in donor recruitment, but in terms of donor care and stewardship, how do we differentiate donors, and is there a hierarchy there?
I think that the first time that I saw you speak, Simon, you asked people to volunteer to call their organization and make a donation. And it's the best party trick in the world. And it went really badly, like really badly, to the point that, and it was a client of mine, but to the point that they said, "Oh, can you just try again?" Like, you got put through to a dead voicemail for the person who was sitting in the room. Like, it was really, really bad. And when we talk about are all donors equal, I think that in my mind, you have to back it up to, like, are we treating all of these people as valuable to the organization, and go really basic. So mystery shop your own organization. Like, I call into my own recruitment department once a week. They hate it, but I want to see how we're answering calls for potential employees. I sign up to be a monthly donor with our clients anonymously, and I want to see how they're going to thank me. The British Red Cross has an expression where they say that, a face-to-face signing up to be a monthly donor is, with a face-to-face fundraiser, is like your best first date. You've got tingles and you're excited, and you've spoken to somebody who is very, very passionate about the organization and the cause that they're working for. And then you put them in a direct mail cycle, and you're treating them like they are just another number, and there's nothing personalized. There's no impact report. There's no story. So, not every donor is going to bring the same amount of funding into an organization, but every interaction with them should have quality, should be tested, and should have dignity at the end of the day.
So it's more about, I suppose, raising our level across the board, and trying to, there's a lot of work that we could be doing in our donor care and our stewardship across the board. And so, Adrian's right, there is a hierarchy in value there, and we need to be mindful about our time. But I suppose at the same time, what we're trying to do is raise everyone so they have that internal feeling. That's what I'm getting from Jen and Alana here. Yeah,
and okay. I would also say that if Alana, this is a conversation for you and I to pick up. If putting them into their direct mail stream is such a soulless experience, then you need better direct mail. Because ideally, by the time, no matter how you recruit someone, whether it's online or whether it's face-to-face or whether they spontaneously give, hopefully the things they get immediately that are in print and the things they get over the long term acknowledge how they came on, what they like, why it matters. And if throwing them into the direct mail stream is like an insult, then it's a bigger conversation.
and that kind of goes back to what you're saying about, there is no, direct mail isn't good or bad. There's good direct mail and bad direct mail. There's good face-to-face and there's bad face-to-face. And if we're giving people bad stuff, then certainly they're not going to feel like a major donor.
Or they're not going to feel like they're even part of the conversation. I thought I was having a conversation with this charity about what I care about and why it matters to me. And now what you're sending me is all about you, and I'm not part of the story anymore. That's deeply flawed, and that's not about the channel. That's about the intention behind the smart fundraising.
Yeah. All right, that's cool. Well, it was nice to cover these 3 unpopular opinions. I'm going to let my special guests, Alana Castle-Woodley and Jen Love, sign off, or at least mute themselves. And then I am going to start to wrap this up. So I want to thank everyone who is watching, or anyone who's listening in the future. This is available on the podcast as of tomorrow or today if you're listening to this, or before if you're listening to this in the future. But otherwise, thanks for everyone who commenting in the comment section on YouTube. Thanks for everyone who's tweeting me at Toast Fundraiser. Thanks especially to the guests who put themselves on the line or put themselves out there to offer their opinion. I really hope we can come back and do this again next month, either with more unpopular fundraising opinions, or we might delve deeper into one particular topic. But keep an eye on my mailing list, keep an eye on my Twitter feed, and I will let you know about this. But please do come and join. Please do have your voice heard. Please do start speaking on this podcast, because it's a great way to start to get out there and get noticed and talk to really intelligent people like Alana and Jen and Harrison. So I'm going to sign off now. Thank you so much for tuning into this. Another live fundraising podcast gone. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and you'll be getting. Hey guys. Hey guys. Like and subscribe, and you'll get plenty more fantastic podcasts straight to your inbox every week. And Harrison, anything to say? Any unpopular opinions?
That name's too long.
My podcast name?
Yeah.
Do you even know what it is? What is it? That's exactly it. So thank you so much for tuning into the podcast, and we'll see you again next time. Take care.
You've been listening to Simon Scriver's Amazingly Ultimate Fundraising Superstar podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and head over to changefundraising.com to learn more or get in touch with Simon. Or don't, whatever, you're big enough to make it.
Hello, this is Morgan Freeman. For discounts on Simon's best-selling online fundraising courses, go to www.changefundraising.com/training and use coupon code podcast. Complete them in your own time, wherever you want. Get busy living or get busy buying.